Welcome back, history buffs. We're doing a deep dive into the JFK assassination. The JFK assassination, a topic that could fill an entire library, let's face it, with research and debate it's generated.
Absolutely. Even decades later, there are still parts of it that puzzle and intrigue us.
Exactly. And you know me, I love a good mystery. So
Yeah.
you brought some articles from the Third Decade Journal focusing on Marina Oswald's testimony and the Dallas Police Department's actions. On that fateful day in Dallas, I have a feeling we're in for some twists and turns today.
Definitely. The articles really dig into those nuances and inconsistencies that make the JFK assassination so captivating. And tragic, of course.
Okay, so let's start with Marina Oswald. Now, one of the key pieces of evidence was the rifle found in the Payne garage, where Lee Harvey Oswald had been storing some of his belongings. But what's fascinating is how Marina's story about that rifle kind of evolved over time.
Her initial statements are particularly noteworthy. On November 22nd, just hours after the assassination, she was questioned at Dallas Police Headquarters, and through translators, she admitted that Lee owned a rifle and kept it in the garage.
Wait, through translators? That seems like a pretty crucial detail,
Mm-hmm.
especially given, the gravity of the situation. Was there any concern about the accuracy of the translation?
That's where things get really interesting. Marina couldn't speak English at the time, so she relied on two translators. Ruth Payne, a friend who had been letting Marina and her children stay at her house, and Ilya Manitov, a man connected to Oswald through mutual white Russian friends.
Hold on. Mutual white Russian friends, and according to this article, a potential connection to intelligence agencies. That seems like something the Warren Commission might have wanted to investigate a bit more thoroughly.
You're picking up on a very crucial point. The article highlights that Manitov actually contacted the FBI after the assassination, offering insights into Oswald's background. He even mentioned being contacted by Army intelligence to translate for Marina. Yet the Warren Commission seemed to have just glossed over this connection.
Okay, so we have these two translators, one with possible intelligence ties, helping Marina communicate with the police during a critical investigation. What about the translators themselves? Were there any doubts about, their reliability?
Well, the article suggests that we should view both Payne and Manitov's translations with some caution. Marina herself apparently told Payne that her Russian had suddenly become no good at all, and Manitov later even described Payne's grasp of the language as very poor.
Okay, so we have Marina, who can't speak English, relying on two translators whose Russian skills were, at best, questionable, and one of whom may have had intelligence connections. This is all happening during the initial questioning about a potential murder weapon. Talk about a recipe for confusion. This raises a crucial question for you to consider. Could the Warren Commission have missed a vital piece of the puzzle by not fully investigating Manitov's background?
It definitely adds another layer of complexity, and it's not just about translation issues. There are also conflicting details in the various statements Marina gave over time. For instance, she initially said she saw the rifle in a blanket about 2 weeks before the assassination, but later testified to seeing it a month earlier.
So her story shifted. Did anyone ever confront her about these, discrepancies?
Surprisingly, no. The article points out that during her Warren Commission testimony, Chief Counsel Rankin, who had access to her previous statements, didn't question her about those inconsistencies in the timeline.
That's strange. So we have potentially unreliable translations, evolving details, and a lack of follow-up on these inconsistencies. It makes you wonder, was Marina pressured or influenced to say her husband owned the rifle? Were her statements manipulated or even fabricated?
It's a question that lingers, and one that adds another layer of complexity to this already intricate puzzle. It really highlights why it's so important to examine all the evidence, even the seemingly small details, with a critical eye.
Absolutely. Now let's turn our attention to the Dallas Police Department. We're going to examine their actions through the lens of the radio logs, the actual police transmissions, from November 22nd, 1963.
These logs provide a real-time, unfiltered view of how the police responded to the events as they unfolded, making them a fascinating resource.
Okay, so let's dive into these radio logs. What jumps out at you when you look at these transmissions?
Well, one of the first things that caught my attention was the unusual behavior of Sergeant D.V. Harkness. He was in charge of traffic control near Elm and Houston Streets, very close to where the assassination took place.
Okay, and what was so unusual about his actions?
Well, about an hour before the assassination, he radioed in to inquire about the motorcade's progress because he had a setup to make. The dispatcher told him not to worry, they'd keep him updated.
Seems reasonable, right? No need to clutter the airwaves when you have a presidential motorcade to coordinate.
Exactly. But just 20 minutes later, the dispatcher, seemingly out of the blue, told Harkness to go ahead and make his setup. We don't know what this setup involved, but what happens next is where it gets peculiar.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happened?
A few minutes before the assassination, Harkness reported an epileptic seizure near the motorcade route. An ambulance was dispatched, and a squad car was even directed to meet the ambulance and victim at Parkland Hospital.
That's odd, especially considering the timing so close to the assassination. Did they ever find this epileptic patient?
Here's the thing. There's no record of any patient with such a complaint being admitted to Parkland that afternoon. And when the FBI finally investigated the incident, months later, they found that the supposed victim, Jerry B. Belknap, had simply disappeared after being picked up by the ambulance.
Disappeared. So we have a phantom epileptic seizure reported by a police officer just minutes before the president is shot, and then the supposed victim vanishes.
It's a bizarre sequence of events, to say the least, and it raises an important question. Could this seizure have been a diversionary tactic? Perhaps to draw attention away from something else happening nearby.
A distraction, maybe even a way to clear the area. It's certainly suspicious.
Absolutely. And this incident is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the Dallas PD's actions that day. The radio logs are riddled with confusing communications and questionable decisions that raise questions about whether something else was going on. These fool's missions, as some researchers call them, raise questions about whether something else was going on.
Like what? Give me another example.
Well, how about the mysterious ambulance?
Mysterious ambulance. What do you mean?
After the shooting, the dispatcher started directing patrol units to clear traffic for the ambulance carrying the president to Parkland Hospital. The problem is there was no ambulance in the motorcade.
Wait, so they were directing traffic for an ambulance that didn't exist?
Exactly, and it gets weirder. At least 2 patrol units reported back that they hadn't seen any ambulance. The dispatcher seemed confused, even asking one unit to check an intersection that wasn't even on the route to Parkland.
Was this just incompetence? Genuine confusion in the heat of the moment?
It's possible, but the dispatcher's lack of knowledge about basic Dallas geography and ambulance procedures is a bit unsettling, to say the least. And it suggests the possibility of intentional misdirection by the police.
Intentional misdirection. Okay, I see where you're going with this. So we have a phantom epileptic seizure and a ghost ambulance. What other oddities can we uncover in these radio logs?
Let's talk about the attempts to pinpoint the location of Officer Tippett's murder. This one's almost comical if it weren't so tragic.
Officer Tippett, the policeman who was allegedly shot by Oswald shortly after the assassination.
That's right. The citizen who first reported Tippett's shooting over the police radio gave the correct location, 404 East 10th Street. But moments later, according to the radio log, the same citizen gave a different incorrect address.
Okay, so maybe the citizen got flustered, misremembered in the panic?
Yeah.
It happens.
Sure, but then the dispatcher, trying to dispatch an ambulance, used yet another address, 501 East 10th. And this address wasn't random. It was the home of Mrs. Frank Wright, who happened to live half a block from the dispatcher's office.
Hold on. He used his neighbor's address to send an ambulance to a murder scene.
It seems that way, and it doesn't stop there. The dispatcher then invented a completely new address and told another officer they had 3 different locations for the shooting. Even when a citizen on the radio clarified that a policeman had been shot out here on 7-Eleven, the dispatcher simply brushed them off.
So much for officer down. We need all available units. This is unbelievable. How long did it take them to figure out where Tippett was shot?
About 6 or 7 minutes. And even then, it seems they were more lucky than competent. 2 patrolmen, Poe and Jez, along with Sergeant Bud Owens, just happened to arrive at the correct location almost simultaneously.
You know, it's one thing to have confusion about a relatively minor incident, but this was the murder of a police officer. It's mind-boggling that there was so much difficulty relaying such crucial information.
I agree, and the confusion surrounding Tippett's murder extends to the hospital he was taken to as well.
What do you mean? What happened at the hospital?
Several ambulances responded to the shooting call, saying they were en route, but none actually reported picking up Tippett's body. Then, Sergeant Gerald Hill arrived at the scene and was asked by the dispatcher which ambulance took Tippett. Hill's response: "No, Odley Hughes passed in front of us going to Beckley. Looked like he might have had him."
So they had no idea which ambulance actually had his body. It's like they were playing a morbid guessing game.
The dispatcher then asked Sergeant Bud Owens where the officer went, and Owens replied, "I saw some squads toward Methodist. I'll bet that's where he is." And indeed, Tippett had been taken to Methodist Hospital. But why none of these real fast squads, presumably police radio units, reported this directly to the dispatcher remains a mystery.
This all just seems incredibly disorganized at best. It's like watching a Keystone Cops routine, only with much higher stakes.
That's a pretty apt comparison. And this pattern of sending officers on seemingly pointless or ill-conceived missions, those fool's missions we talked about, continues throughout the radio logs. It makes you wonder about the true motives behind these instructions.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about these fool's missions.
Well, let's revisit the controversial instruction for Officer Tippit to patrol Central Oak Cliff, which led him to the very spot where he encountered Oswald. Was this a tragic coincidence, or did the police know where Oswald would be?
That's a question that has fueled countless debates over the years.
It has, and it's not the only instance of questionable instructions. There's also the bizarre sequence of events as Sergeant Owens repeatedly asks about someone notifying Tippit's wife, but then sends an officer who doesn't even know her address and provides the wrong one.
Wait, so they wanted to inform the widow but couldn't even be bothered to get the right address? That's incredibly insensitive, even if we assume it was just a mistake.
It's a detail that highlights the overall lack of communication and attention to detail that seemed to plague the Dallas PD that day. And then there's the delayed response and subsequent underutilization of the search dogs requested by Captain Talbert at the Texas School Book Depository.
The building where the fatal shots were allegedly fired from.
That's right. Talbert specifically requested the dogs, saying it would be a hard one to search out thoroughly without them. But when the dogs finally arrived, they were sent on completely unrelated missions, one to Oak Cliff and the other back to the Texas theater where Oswald was arrested.
So they called in the dogs and then basically ignored them. This raises the question, were the dogs intended as a genuine investigative tool? Or was calling them in just a way to create a facade of thoroughness?
It's a perplexing situation that underscores the need to critically examine every detail of this event.
Okay, I'm sensing a pattern here. Not a lot of substance.
Exactly. And it's a pattern that repeats itself with the rifle in the seat wild goose chase.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
This involves Officer R.W. Nelson, who was initially stationed at the Texas School Book Depository. Shortly after the assassination, he was dispatched to Oak Cliff, Code 3, lights and sirens blaring, to investigate a tip about a suspect with a rifle in their car.
What was so strange about that? It sounds like a pretty urgent lead, especially given the circumstances.
It might have been, except this tip seemed completely unrelated to the assassination. We're talking about a suspect in a white station wagon seen pulling into and out of a service station with a rifle laying in plain view.
Okay, so maybe not the most pressing lead in the world. But what's the big deal?
The big deal is that valuable time was lost pursuing this tip while the assassination investigation was still in its early stages. Nelson had to drive all the way to Oak Cliff, gather information, and report back, all while the real killer could have been getting away.
It's like they prioritized a random tip over the most important investigation in the country's history.
It does make you question their priorities. And what's even more baffling is that there was no recorded follow-up on this tip. No attempt to track down the suspect, no check on the license plate, nothing.
So they sent an officer on a Code 3 chase for what turned out to be a dead end.
It seems that way. And again, it raises the question, why was this seemingly unrelated tip prioritized over other potentially more relevant leads?
It's like they were more interested in chasing shadows than actually solving the case.
A thought-provoking observation, and one that perfectly encapsulates the overall sense of confusion and misdirection that we've uncovered in the Dallas PD's actions that day.
All right, so we've explored Marina Oswald's evolving statements about the rifle and delved into the Dallas Police Department's questionable decisions through their radio logs. But I have a feeling there's more to uncover, right?
There is. We've only just scratched the surface of this complex and intriguing event. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll examine some additional inconsistencies and puzzling actions that continue to fuel the debate about the JFK assassination.
This is getting good. I can't wait to see what other rabbit holes we can find. Stay with us as we continue to explore the mysteries of the JFK assassination.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the JFK assassination. As we've seen, the actions of the Dallas Police Department on that day raise a number of questions.
It's like trying to assemble a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half don't quite fit.
A perfect analogy. And the more we examine the details, the more those missing pieces and ill-fitting edges become apparent. Let's take, for example, the issue of Oswald's alleged membership in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
The FPCC, a pro-Castro organization that Oswald was supposedly associated with.
Yes, the one that famously sent him to New Orleans to hand out leaflets and get into arguments with anti-Castro groups.
Okay, so what's the issue with that? It's not exactly a secret that Oswald had some sympathy for communist causes.
True, but the timing of the Dallas Police Department's discovery of Oswald's FPCC membership is suspicious, to say the least.
What do you mean? When exactly did they find this information?
Well, according to Captain Fritz, who was in charge of the Homicide Bureau, they didn't come across any indication of Oswald's FPCC affiliation until around 5 p.m. on November 22nd.
5 p.m., that's hours after the assassination and Oswald's arrest. What were they doing all that time?
That's the million-dollar question. According to Fritz, the search of Oswald's rooming house at 1026 North Beckley turned up nothing of value.
Hold on. 1026 North Beckley. Isn't that the same address where Officer Tippett was supposedly taken after being shot?
You have a good eye for detail. Yes, it's the very same address. Quite a strange coincidence, wouldn't you say?
Coincidence. Or something more deliberate. Maybe an attempt to connect Oswald to Tippett's murder, even though the police supposedly believed those events were unrelated at the time?
It certainly adds another layer of suspicion to an already murky situation. But let's get back to Oswald's FPCC membership. We have Captain Fritz claiming they didn't find anything related to the FPCC until 5 p.m. Yet a press release issued by the Dallas Police Department at 6:15 p.m. that same day not only mentions Oswald's FPCC affiliation, but also includes specific details about his activities with the organization.
Wait, so they went from knowing nothing about Oswald's FPCC connection to having detailed information in just over an hour?
Exactly. And it gets even more curious. A memo written by FBI agent Husty on November 23rd, the day after the assassination, indicates that Dallas police had informed him about Oswald's FPCC membership and his trip to New Orleans before the assassination.
So the FBI knew about Oswald's FPCC connection before the assassination, but the Dallas police only discovered it hours after the fact, despite supposedly having that information all along.
It's a baffling contradiction, and it suggests a possible effort to manipulate the timeline and control the narrative surrounding Oswald's background and potential motives.
It seems like they were trying to create a guilty by association scenario, linking Oswald to a pro-Castro group to make him seem more like a likely assassin.
It's a plausible theory. And it raises serious questions about the integrity of the Dallas Police Department's investigation. Were they genuinely seeking the truth, or were they trying to build a case against Oswald regardless of the facts?
It's a disturbing thought. And this isn't the only instance where the Dallas PD's actions seem more focused on pinning the blame on Oswald than on conducting a thorough and impartial investigation.
You're absolutely right. Remember those fool's missions we discussed earlier? Those seemingly pointless tasks assigned to officers in the aftermath of the assassination.
Oh, I remember them all right. Like sending officers to chase a phantom ambulance and struggling to locate a murdered policeman.
Those examples, while certainly indicative of incompetence or confusion, could also be interpreted as deliberate attempts to distract and misdirect attention away from more important leads.
So not just Keystone cops, but maybe even cunning manipulators. That's a twist.
Perhaps. Consider the incident with Officer Nelson, who was sent on a Code 3 chase to Oak Cliff based on that tip about a suspect with a rifle in their car. What if that tip was intentionally planted? A red herring, designed to send officers on a wild goose chase while something else was happening elsewhere.
Whoa. So we're not just talking about incompetence anymore. We're talking about potential deception. Maybe even a coordinated effort to cover something up.
That's a very real possibility, and it's a possibility that should give us pause when we consider the official narrative of the JFK assassination. If the Dallas Police Department was willing to manipulate evidence and misdirect their own officers, what else might they have been capable of?
It's a chilling question, and it makes you wonder if we'll ever truly know what happened that day in Dallas.
The truth, as they say, is often elusive, especially when it comes to events of such magnitude and historical significance. But it's important to keep asking questions, to challenge assumptions, and to examine all the evidence, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's those seemingly insignificant details, the ones that don't quite fit, that can lead us to a deeper understanding of what really transpired.
Wise words. And with that in mind, let's delve into another perplexing aspect of the Dallas PD's actions: the handling of the evidence.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of forensic details. What stands out to you?
One of the most puzzling aspects of the evidence handling is the chain of custody, or rather, the lack thereof.
Chain of custody. You mean keeping track of who had access to the evidence and when?
Precisely. A solid chain of custody is crucial in any criminal investigation, especially one as high profile as the JFK assassination. It ensures the integrity of the evidence and prevents tampering or contamination.
Makes sense. So what went wrong in this case?
Well, to put it mildly, the chain of custody was a mess. Multiple individuals handled crucial pieces of evidence, often without proper documentation or even basic security measures. For example, the rifle allegedly used in the assassination was handled by numerous police officers, FBI agents, and even members of the press, all before it was properly secured.
Wait, members of the press? They let reporters touch the potential murder weapon. That's outrageous.
It's certainly not standard procedure, to say the least. And this lackadaisical approach to evidence handling extends to other key items, such as the bullet fragments recovered from the president's limousine and the paper bag allegedly found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository.
The bag that supposedly contained the disassembled rifle.
Yes, that one. The problem is there are conflicting accounts of who found the bag, where it was found, and what it actually looked like. Some witnesses claim it was a brown paper bag, while others describe it as a shopping bag with the name of a local store printed on it. And to make matters worse, the bag was never properly photographed or documented before it was handled and moved.
So we have a potentially crucial piece of evidence, the bag that supposedly linked Oswald to the crime scene, and no one can even agree on what it looked like or where it was found.
It's a frustrating situation, and one that raises serious doubts about the reliability of the evidence itself. If the chain of custody is so compromised, how can we be sure that the evidence hasn't been tampered with or even planted?
It's like trying to build a case on a foundation of sand. It's just not going to hold up under scrutiny.
That's an apt analogy. And this lack of proper evidence handling wasn't limited to physical objects. It also extended to witness testimony.
Witness testimony. How could they mess that up?
Well, there were numerous instances where witnesses were pressured, coerced, or even threatened by law enforcement officials. Some witnesses reported being told what to say, while others claimed their statements were altered or misrepresented in official reports.
Wow. So not only was the physical evidence mishandled, but they were also trying to influence what witnesses were saying. That's a whole new level of shady.
It's a disturbing pattern, and one that has led many researchers to question the validity of the official investigation.
It's hard to argue with that. When you have such blatant disregard for proper procedures and basic investigative principles, it's impossible to take anything at face value.
You're right. And it's why this case continues to fascinate and frustrate us, even after all these years. There are just too many unanswered questions, too many inconsistencies, too many things that don't add up.
It's like a puzzle that's been deliberately designed to be unsolvable.
Perhaps that's the most unsettling thought of all.
Welcome back, everyone. We're in the final stretch of our deep dive into the JFK assassination. And trust me, we've saved some of the most thought-provoking material for last.
Indeed. We've been carefully examining the events of that day, with a special focus on Marina Oswald's testimony and those curious options, shall we say, of the Dallas Police Department.
We've encountered phantom epileptic seizures, a mysterious ambulance that never existed. Oh, and a dispatcher who seemed to have a better grasp of his neighbor's address than the location of a murdered police officer.
And let's not forget the mishandling of evidence, the questionable witness interviews, and, well, that lingering feeling that something just doesn't quite add up in the official narrative.
Exactly. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle, where someone swapped out half the pieces for ones from a completely different picture.
A very apt analogy. But amidst all this confusion and contradiction, there's one event that stands out as particularly perplexing, even within the, already strange context of the JFK assassination.
Okay, lay it on me. What event are we talking about?
The delayed response and subsequent underutilization of the search dogs requested by Captain Talbert at the Texas School Book Depository.
Yes, the search dogs that were called in, but then seemingly ignored. It's like calling for pizza delivery and then refusing to answer the door when it arrives.
A rather frustrating experience, to be sure. And the more we dig into this incident, the more puzzling it becomes.
Okay, walk me through it. What exactly happened?
Well, Captain Talbert was in charge of the initial investigation at the Texas School Book Depository, the building from which Oswald allegedly fired the fatal shots.
All right. And he requested search dogs to assist with the investigation, believing it would be, and I quote, a hard one to search out thoroughly without them.
Exactly. Now, keep in mind this was mere minutes after the assassination. The situation was chaotic, tensions were high, and everyone was scrambling to make sense of what had just happened.
I can only imagine the pressure they must have been under. So what happened with the dogs?
The request for dogs went out over the police radio, and 2 patrolmen, J.N. Williams and S.R. Norman, were dispatched to pick them up.
Okay, so far so good. Seems like a reasonable response given the circumstances. What's the problem?
The problem is that it took an exceptionally long time for the dogs to arrive at the scene. Over an hour, in fact. And when they finally did arrive, they were, well, almost immediately sent on seemingly unrelated missions.
Wait. They waited an hour for the dogs to arrive and then just sent them away? Why even bother calling them in the first place?
It's baffling, isn't it? Patrolman Williams, who had one of the dogs, reported back that he was in the downtown area and available for assignment. Instead of being directed to the book depository, he was sent to Oak Cliff to assist in the search for Oswald.
Okay, that's weird. But maybe they thought they needed the dog more in Oak Cliff, where Oswald was last seen.
Perhaps. But then Patrolman Norman, who had the other dog, also reported back as available. The dispatcher asked Captain Talbert where he wanted Norman, and Talbert replied, "Send him to the Texas Theater. They don't need him down at the book depository."
Hold on. The Texas Theater. That's where Oswald was arrested, right? But why would they send a search dog there? Oswald was already in custody.
It doesn't make much sense, does it? And what's even more peculiar is that neither the dispatcher nor Captain Talbert ever mentioned the dogs again. It's as if they simply forgot about them.
So they called in these dogs, waited an hour for them to arrive, then sent them on wild goose chases, and then completely ignored them. It's like a scene from a Monty Python sketch.
A very absurd situation indeed. And it's one that has led some researchers to speculate that the delayed response and subsequent underutilization of the search dogs was intentional.
Intentional? You mean they deliberately sabotaged their own investigation? Why would they do that?
It's hard to say for sure, but there are a few possible explanations.
Okay, let's hear them. I'm all ears.
Well, one possibility is that the dogs were never intended to be used in the investigation. They were called in to create the appearance of a thorough search. But the authorities had no real intention of allowing them to sniff around the crime scene.
So it was all for show. A public relations stunt.
Perhaps. Or maybe they were afraid of what the dogs might find. What if the dogs picked up a scent that didn't belong to Oswald? A scent that led to someone else. Someone they didn't want implicated in the assassination.
Now that's a conspiracy theory I can get behind. A secret trail of evidence that the authorities were desperate to cover up.
It's a tantalizing thought, and it's not entirely implausible. After all, we've already seen how the Dallas Police Department mishandled other aspects of the investigation.
True, but let's not get too carried away with speculation. Is there any other evidence to suggest that the search dogs were, deliberately sidelined?
There's the curious fact that neither Patrolman Williams nor Patrolman Norman ever filed a report about their activities with the dogs that day. And Captain Talbert, who initially insisted on the need for the dogs, never mentioned them again after sending them away.
So missing reports, radio silence. It's like they were trying to erase any record of the dog's involvement in the investigation.
It's certainly suspicious, and it adds another layer of intrigue to an already perplexing incident.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this whole search dog situation has become such a focal point for JFK assassination researchers. It's like a microcosm of the entire investigation.
Yeah.
Confusing, contradictory, and ultimately unsatisfying.
You've hit the nail on the head. The search dog incident really encapsulates the many frustrations and unanswered questions that surround the JFK assassination. We have evidence that something strange happened, but we may never know the full story.
It's like a missing piece of the puzzle that we'll never be able to find.
And perhaps that's the enduring legacy of the JFK assassination. It's a historical event that continues to haunt us, to challenge our understanding of the past, and to remind us that, well, sometimes the truth remains elusive.
Well, this deep dive has certainly been an eye-opener. We've gone from Marina Oswald's evolving story to the, let's just say, interesting actions of the Dallas PD, uncovering more questions than answers along the way.
But isn't that the beauty of exploring history? It's not about memorizing dates and names, but about grappling with the complexities of the past, the uncertainties, the things that make us question what we thought we knew.
I couldn't have put it better myself. You've given me, and I'm sure all our listeners, a lot to think about. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the JFK assassination.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the pursuit of truth is an ongoing process. Keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions, and keep exploring the many facets of this enduring mystery.
And so, to all our listeners out there, as you delve deeper into the JFK assassination, consider this. Could the chaos and inconsistencies we've discussed be less about incompetence and more about a deliberate attempt to obscure the truth? Until next time, stay curious.